Hello friends, it's Evelyn here. Welcome back to the channel. About last week. So personally, last week was really tough. My inner critic was incredibly harsh to me and I'd taken on quite a big project, which was to create a bodice block tutorial for you. I succeeded. But my inner voice was constantly saying to me that it wasn't good enough, that you wouldn't be able to understand it, that the quality wasn't good enough, that my skill set wasn't good enough, despite the fact that I have been pattern drafting for over 2 decades and sewing for nearly 4 decades. But my inner critic wasn't having any of it. But I persevered and I uploaded the video. And then came your response. Breaking record time, I really need to say a huge thank you here. I cannot believe the response to this video. Sat here recording this today, the video currently has over 600 views. It might as well be 600 million because each of those views just means so much to me, so thank you so much. And big news, I am going to continue creating pattern drafting tutorials for you here on the channel. The next one, which I am currently working on now, will be uploaded next Friday and it is a sleeve block tutorial, so stay tuned for that. But this week I really needed to give myself a little bit of R&R with one of my other passions, and that passion is knitting. Yes, I absolutely love knitting, but it's not something I've been doing for as long as I've been sewing. So I do have to refer back to reference books quite frequently and even some videos on YouTube. Yes, you heard that right. With sewing, it's become something like almost second nature, but with knitting, I definitely feel like a very inexperienced knitter. And before lockdown, oh, I said that dirty word, before lockdown, I literally just created things like scarves in garter and stockinette stitch. But during that first lockdown, I really threw myself into vintage knitting. So 2 of my passions coming together, knitting on one hand and vintage inspired patterns on the other. Perfect. And I am very happy to say that I created my very first jumper in that lockdown, which you may already have seen in a previous video, and I'll pop a card up to it up here if I work out how to do it. And the response to that mustard coloured jumper was unreal. Everyone loved that jumper and I've lost count of how many people I've sent the pattern link to. So if that's something that you would like, let me know and I'll wing the link away to you too. But this week what I decided to do was get into that knitting bag and find out how many projects I've got that I have yet to finish. It's a couple. And this week I wanted to give myself something that would let me relax, spend a little bit of time with Luna, who is currently sat on my lap here, and get some unfinished projects finished. So this week, come along with Luna and I as we get to some knitting. Again, a massive thank you. Thank you so much for your support. I might also have a notebook full of the projects I want to share with you with pattern drafting going forwards. So yes, given myself quite a lot of work, but I absolutely love doing what I'm doing. And of course it means that I'm going to add to my wardrobe, so what's not to love? As always, let's begin by talking supplies. All you really need to begin your knitting journey is a pair of scissors, a pair of knitting needles, some yarn and possibly a darning needle, and I really do suggest that you begin by learning stockinette and garter stitches. These are nice and simple, but you could still create, for example, a scarf. One of my top tips to keep your knitting patterns nice and organised is to get a folder like this one. This one has little plastic sleeves inside so that I can put each pattern in nice and tidily. I also recommend having a notebook handy just in case you make any alterations to the pattern so that you can note them down for future reference. And here is just a small selection of my favourite knitting books. For inspiration, check out your local library. Not only does using the library help to keep them running, but there is a wealth of information on those shelves. A lot of libraries also now have phone apps where you can search the catalogue to see what knitting books you can borrow, and you can even reserve them online. How great is that? I also suggest checking out Amazon and secondhand bookshops like World of Books and even eBay. First up is Geraldine Warner's Vintage Design Workshop. The first half of this book is devoted to understanding retro and vintage patterns, whereas the second half is devoted to giving a more vintage feel to modern patterns. It's a great informative book, and I absolutely love the colourful photos and design. Hollywood Knits by Bill Gibb gives you the chance to create 20 beautiful vintage patterns inspired by the looks of Hollywood film stars. And I haven't yet been able to create one of these garments, but I'm particularly excited about creating the project inspired by Judy Garland. So if you'd like to do some Hollywood movie star knitting, definitely check this book out. Finally, Dorling Kindersley's The Knitting Book is an absolute must. I recently borrowed this copy from my local library, and I am definitely going to purchase a copy of my own. This book is so concise, I cannot even begin to express it. It is great for beginner and advanced knitters alike. It goes through hundreds of different stitches and even includes full projects as well, so definitely check this out too. So you've got your supplies together and you've done some reading, possibly even some knitting already. But where do you go to quench that appetite for beautiful vintage patterns? As always, the internet is a haven of knowledge and information, and there are a few websites I would like to recommend. Definitely check out freevintageknitting.com, where you can access hundreds of free vintage knitting patterns, from jumpers right through to hats, gloves and scarves. This is a fantastic resource. Vintage Knitting Pattern Archive is another free to access website where there are lots of free vintage patterns to download. I love this site. I particularly love as well that a lot of the patterns are in full colour, so you can really get an idea of what the vintage knitting pattern would have looked like back in the day. Subversive Femme is one of my very favourite knitting blogs, and Bex, its creator, is fantastic. She is full of wonderful tips and tricks, and you can also access both free and paid for patterns on her website. Definitely check her out, and you will see one of her patterns in the video in a little bit. Ravelry is a free online community for knitters and crocheters, and I am still getting to grips with this website, but it is a fantastic resource once again, where you can connect with knitters around the globe, share projects and also share tips and tricks too, so I highly recommend this. As always, I will pop all the links in the description box below so you can check it out for yourself. With all of these incredible free resources at your fingertips, I really would suggest taking an hour, grabbing a cuppa and a xoxo digestive and getting lost in the wonderful world of knitting on the web. You never know, that pattern that you've had your eye on might be out there for free. So here is my current knitting bag, which is actually a really battered and bruised Jane Norman bag. Who else remembers Jane Norman? I absolutely loved that shop, and when it closed down I got some beautiful evening dresses and some incredible leopard print high heels as well. Anyway, I digress. I have got plans to make myself a proper knitting bag with zips and compartments for my yarns and needles and projects and works in progress and things, but that hasn't materialised yet. I tend to keep in here any unfinished projects, any works in progress, yarns that I'm using, and all my needles which are in the bottom. So let's have a look. In terms of yarn, because I am a very inexperienced knitter, I'm a very new knitter, I tend to keep to projects that are using DK or double knit weight yarn. Not only is this incredibly accessible, but it's also cheap. That's right, it's affordable. So if I do make any mistakes, I am not breaking the bank. So I tend to stick with DK weight projects at the moment. So if I get all this yarn out, so I've got some really nice colour, I absolutely love that. And you'll see that in a second actually, because that has created one of my UFOs. And you might have seen this yarn already on the channel because I used it to create that beautiful knit beret. I'll pop a card up to it just in case you want to create your own, and it'll also be making an appearance later on the video. Ooh, there's another UFO here. Goodness me. I've been spending quite a lot of time recently sewing, so I've actually forgotten about quite a lot of these. This was actually the first jumper I knitted, and it's only got the tiniest seam to finish. It's actually for my daughter, so I need to finish that definitely. I've got some really beautiful dusky pink here that I think I know what I want to make with it, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. So in the bottom of this bag I have my little notions pouch. In here I've got stitch markers and a knitting needle gauge, size gauge, tape measure, pair of scissors, pencil, needle stoppers and other sundries. And then in the bottom of this bag is all of my knitting needles. So my top tip for getting your own collection of knitting needles would be firstly to let your family and friends know that you've taken up knitting, because quite a lot of people have vintage needles like these beautiful ones here just stashed at home. It might be an aunt, it might be a friend, it might be your nan who used to knit and doesn't knit anymore, and you can take care of those wonderful family heirlooms. Another big tip is check on sites such as eBay and get yourself thrifting. Get to charity shops, ask if they have any knitting patterns, knitting needles, or any kind of supply like that, and you will be well on your way. So, let's get to looking at this pile of UFOs, shall we? So as I mentioned, looking in charity shops and second-hand stores is a great way to add to your needle collection and even to find vintage knitting patterns. Here are just a few of the vintage needles I have collected, and you can see that they come in such a beautiful array of colours. I do suggest having a small bag like this to put your knitting notions in. It's a great way to help you keep organised and keep your scissors and stitch markers and all of that nice and together. The first completed project I would like to share with you is this beautiful rainbow beret, and you may recognise it from previously on the channel when I created a tutorial to show you how to make one of your own, and the link is in the description box below this video. I absolutely love how this beret turned out, and I love how this rainbow yarn looks. It's beautiful. Next up, and yes, you guessed it, it's another hat to continue with my hat obsession. This again is another self-drafted pattern, this time using a really chunky heavyweight yarn. And if you would like to make a chunky beret of your own, let me know and I can share the pattern with you. I absolutely love the sunshine yellow colour of this beret, and it happens to be one of my very favourite hats. Because of the chunky yarn, it's also incredibly warm to wear in winter. What a bonus! I am incredibly proud of this next project. This is the first jumper I ever completed on my knitting journey, and you might recognise it from previously on the channel when I did a Beatnik lookbook, and I'll pop a card to that video up above. And the response to this mustard coloured jumper was absolutely incredible. You loved it. The pattern for this jumper is the Claire sweater, and I did make a few alterations to the pattern because I was concerned it would come out a bit small. As it turns out, it is now a little bit roomy. I am planning to create another Claire sweater very soon, and this time I won't make any alterations, I'll just stick to the pattern. It is a pleasure to knit, and with just stockingette stitch and rib stitch, it is a lovely beginner friendly project. The only advanced thing I would say is the picking up of stitches around the armhole curve to create your sleeves, but with just a little bit of patience, I know you can do it. I absolutely adore this sweater. It's incredibly comfy to wear and still gives off a classy vintage vibe, so it's perfect for those days at home or even for walking Luna. It is the perfect comfy yet classy addition to your vintage style wardrobe, and it's even more perfect for sitting reading with a good companion. And so onwards we go to those UFOs, or unfinished objects. First up is this beautiful blue striped sweater. It is knit simply in stockingette stitch with ribbing at the waistline and neckline, and I do suggest that you start with a simple project like this. This was actually the first jumper I ever cast onto my needles. The pattern is a vintage Jack Frost pattern available from freevintageknitting.com. It's a lovely simple knit in two pieces, one for the front and one for the back, and the shoulder and side seams are then sewn. I'm quite ashamed to say that the only thing stopping this sweater being finished was this tiny seam on the neckline. So this week I got right to it. And here we have the finished sweater. I absolutely adore this striped sweater. For the first sweater I ever knitted, I think it's great, and this was actually for my daughter and she adores it, which really is the only thing that matters. I can definitely see more of these sweaters in my own wardrobe, and I actually have some mint and white yarn in my stash that I think would be perfect for it. And here is the striped sweater being modelled by its owner, my beautiful daughter Bethany. The second UFO that I tackled this week is this beautiful dolman sleeved sweater, and it's actually the second jumper I ever began to knit. It was actually pretty ambitious too, because it has a yarn over pattern along the entire sweater. The reason that this jumper ended up a UFO in the bottom of my knitting bag was because I was a little bit anxious about picking up stitches along the neckline and along the sleeves for the wristbands. However, as I always say, be kind to yourself and have a little bit of patience. It proved that I didn't need to be anxious at all, and that this was a skill that I have now mastered. I picked up the pattern for this 1952 baby turtleneck from Killer Kitsch Designs, which is one of my favourite sites to purchase vintage patterns. And here I am picking up some of those stitches, and you can see Luna at times popping in and out of the shot. One of my favourite things about knitting is you can really do it anywhere. Going travelling, you can take your knitting. Not feeling up to getting out of bed, you can knit. Now, I absolutely love sewing, but a lot of it demands you being at your sewing machine, whereas knitting, you really can take it anywhere, and that is one of my absolute favourite parts of it. And here we can see one of the cuffs actually being completed. I really love this in knitting, that when you complete one section, for example, if you finish sewing the front or the back, or you finish sewing a waistband or a cuff, you can really start to see the project coming together, and it's really satisfying. Using a darning needle and an invisible seam technique, here I am seaming the seams of the jumper along the sleeves, shoulder line and side seams. This is my favourite way to seam knitwear because, as the name suggests, it's invisible. The final thing I needed to do to finish this UFO was to install the zip in the back seam. I chose to handpick this zip, and it proved to be an excellent choice because the zip looks great and functions excellently. And here is the completed dolman sweater. To say I am elated with this jumper really does not cover it. The fit is exceptional and it really does look great, and I'm actually really proud of myself for creating this sweater. I love the choice of yarn that I used for this jumper as well, because it's created these amazing stripes along the sweater. This has to be one of the most favourite things I have ever created. I absolutely love it. The current work in progress on my needles is this MAME sweater from Subversive Femme, and I absolutely love it. Full disclosure here, I was hoping to have this ready to show you this week, but my hands had other ideas after all the knitting I'd already done, but I will share it with you as soon as it is finished. Here I am working on the front neckline of the MAME sweater. This sweater comes together really quickly. It is a pleasure to knit, and it is a nice beginner friendly project too, so definitely check this one out. So what am I planning to cast onto my needles in the future? As well as continuing with my MAME sweater, I have my eye on this gorgeous boat-necked jumper. It has a really beautiful evening wear feel about it, and I love the neckline, so I cannot wait to get stuck into that. This year I would also love to get into some colour work other than simple stripes, and this camellia jumper is perfect for that. I absolutely love the rose motif. It's completely up my street and I cannot wait to give this a try. But my ultimate goal this year is to be able to create a Betty and Judy Lodge sweater for Christmas. I absolutely love Poison Girls and Amy's designs, and it is a really big goal to be able to create one of these jumpers ready for Yuletide. Phew, that was quite a lot of knitting in the end, but I really enjoyed myself, and the finished results, I could not be happier. I definitely see more knitting in my future, and actually now that I have finished those projects, I don't actually have any projects underway. So here's where you lovely people come in. If you know of any vintage patterns that you think I would love, please let me know in the comments below, and maybe we could get a knit along going. That sounds like it could be quite a lot of fun actually, Evelyn. Good idea. So until next week, from a fast asleep Luna and I, take care friends. Bye bye.